Where I like to start all of these podcasts, I like to go all the way back to the beginning. So, were you born and raised in Oregon?
I was, yeah. I'm a second or third generation Oregonian. Grew up just outside of Portland my entire life. Actually, same home. My parents never moved. Blessed to have that opportunity. It was a great neighborhood I grew up in, and attended University of Oregon after that, as my parents did. I'm sure we'll dive into that.
And so, how close are you, just out of curiosity, to Vancouver, Washington? Because my last guest is actually from Vancouver.
Oh, really? Yeah. I mean, I'm 20 minutes, maybe. I mean, max. The traffic isn't too bad in Portland, so it didn't take very long to get to Vancouver.
I figured you'd be pretty close together. Um, but you mentioned Oregon there. So, kind of scrolling through, I scrolled through your Instagram, and there's a lot of photos at Oregon, even before you went there. I'm talking about like not when you were a student, but like before there. From my understanding, it was like your dream school since you were 5 years old. So, what was it about Oregon?
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of touched on it. It was always my. It kind of felt like a second home. Both my parents attended there. That's where they met, frankly, and so just growing up as in kind of a duck family, if you will, and being fairly close. It's about an hour and a half from where my parents and where I used to live to Eugene, which is where the University of Oregon is. We would always go to football games, basketball games. Obviously, my family and myself are big sports fans, as you've seen my content, I'm sure. And yeah, it was always kind of like a second home. I applied to a few other schools, but I was like, in the end, I was like, this is where I've always wanted to go. This is where I'm most comfortable. They have, kind of the sort of the space that I wanted to get into, and things that I was curious about, and I never really looked back after that.
And with a GPA above 4.0 in grade 12, there's no way you weren't getting in.
Yeah, yeah. I think that might be you're making me sound good. I think it was like, I don't know. I don't really know what my GPA was. I don't think it was a 4.0, but I think it was like a 3.5 or something in high school. And yeah, hey, I was just happy they accepted me and I got in.
I found somewhere that you had over 4.0 in grade 12, at
Really?
least. That's where
I,
I was like an award or something. I'm pretty sure. Like, I can't remember where it was, but I wrote it down here that it was like an award you won for having an over 4.0.
yeah, I wonder if that was for like just a specific quarter or something. But you're probably not wrong. I mean, I to be honest, I don't even remember my high school GPA.
No, that's fair. I don't think anyone does, but I just wanted to throw that out there. But entrepreneurship was always a big thing for you as well, growing up, from my understanding. Like, I know you had a car detailing business in high school, but was there any like early? Actually, I think I found somewhere that did you use like it was rocks or something at your family beach house where you like got them and sold them? Was that like the first entrepreneurial foray for you?
Yeah, yeah, man, Jacob, you dug deep. So my family, we've got a beach house in kind of a small beach town called Oceanside, Oregon, and one of my things that I always loved to do when I was a kid was find agates, which kind of naturally polished rocks from the ocean, and they look really cool. And so that's exactly what I did. I kind of like collected these rocks, and I would like sell them to my neighbors once we got back to home and not at the coast. And so that was, yeah, I guess that was kind of like my first ever entrepreneurial endeavor, really.
And are either of your parents entrepreneurial? Like, or are you just kind of like completely different from them?
I would say I'm fairly different. They have some entrepreneurial kind of side hustles and tendencies now, but from what I understand, when they were growing up, that wasn't really their forte.
Okay, so why do you think it was yours?
Good question. I think that there's just something kind of ingrained in me that just loves providing value to people, whether that's information, whether that's education, whether that's entertainment, frankly. And also, I get a ton of value. I It brings me so much joy. It's like it just doesn't even seem like work. Whatever I'm working on, kind of being your own boss in a sense. Um, it just doesn't even feel like work. It's so fun to me.
So then when you had that car detailing business, was that like your job through high school? Like you didn't have like a regular part-time job, like you ran your own business and that was your part-time job in high school?
Yeah, correct. So me and two buddies and I actually, we just have just a fondness for cars. We always have, and he kind of lived in a nicer neighborhood, and there were some nicer cars in that neighborhood, and we would, I mean, quite literally go from door to door, or we'd go to like the local shopping area and pop our cards on there and see. And we would get emails, we would get calls. It was a ton of word of mouth, but I mean, we probably had for a solid maybe 2 years. I mean, at least 3 to 4 cars that we detailed a week. We just absolutely loved it. We'd pop on music, we'd start detailing the cars. It'd take a few hours to do, a couple, and just had a great time doing it.
Is it nerve wracking to clean like really nice and expensive cars? Like knowing that you can't scratch this, you can't screw up in any way because they are so expensive?
What's interesting is that we were actually really confident in our ability to detail, because we get that. I got that question a lot when I was younger, especially when we would do kind of polishes and waxing. Um, but because there's very little kind of margin of error there. But yeah, honestly, the most nerve wracking part was driving it back to the client. Well, to be completely honest, everything else was like super confident in our ability. We had fun with it. We had a ton of like really good client kind of reviews, if you will, and just had a great time doing it.
That's awesome. And so that was high school, and then you went to Oregon right away, right? There was no year in between.
Correct. Yes.
So how did it feel when you got accepted? Being the dream school since you were 5 years old, you've been going there your entire life to actually know that you get to attend there. Like, what did that feel like for you?
A huge weight lifted off my chest. I don't know why I ever doubted that, like, oh, they would, not let me in and I would get denied. I feel like that's always kind of a fear of every high school student, of you not getting into your dream school, even if it's I don't want to say like, for sure a lock. But yeah, I was just so excited for the next stage of my life, and to find the people that I wanted to resonate with, and just kind of find myself, actually, in a sense.
And I've heard you say elsewhere that you're not a traditional learner. So I'm curious, like, especially as someone who's not a traditional learner and entrepreneurial, why did you still decide to go to school? Was it just the draw of Oregon itself and kind of the aura that school gives off? That's why you went. Like, why did you decide to still go to school?
I talk about this a lot, actually. Yeah, even in high school, that's why I was shocked to hear I had a 4.0. Was that I just have such a hard time with the traditional and, frankly, in my opinion, antiquated way that we teach our youth these days. I much prefer experience. I mean, experience overall. Just dive in. That's how you learn best, in my opinion. I think the biggest value of going to university and attending is the personal growth. Kind of what I mentioned towards the end of that last sentence. Is you really find yourself. I was a completely different person freshman year than who I came to be senior year. And that's something that, in my opinion, is well worth every dime of college. And you also find business partners, you find lifelong friends, you find faculty that can help you in various different ways, um, that sticks with you for the rest of your life.
Is there a way to replicate that without going to school?
I hadn't really thought about something like that. I know there's a bunch of kind of alternative schools popping up, left and right. I have no experience or little knowledge of kind of how those pan out, to be honest with you. But absolutely. I mean, again, I think that the personal growth is invaluable. It's in college, but I think the extracurricular aspects and the what you're kind of curious about and how you pursue that is where you can learn most and get your most value. And I think that those things, the latter half of those things, can be absolutely learned and pursued outside of a college environment.
And did you do any of the online learning? Like, did COVID happen? I think it was like your senior year, right? So did you have to do any of the online learning stuff?
I did, and it wasn't the same. It for sure didn't seem worth it at that point. And yeah, I'm actually really grateful for that, because we'll dive into this in just a second probably. But that's kind of where I started the whole TikTok thing, was in quarantine. But yeah, definitely school was much more challenging and not so fun.
Yeah, no, I asked that because like I see all these people, like I follow some different people that have their own online courses that they teach and they talk about building community online, but it's just like, I don't know how you could replicate that experience online with like, from the school aspect. Like I only did 2 years at like a community college, I guess, equivalent here in Canada. But it was awesome. And it was all in person. It was very hands-on, kind of like you said. Like I chose that school because it was very practical. There was like the final year was working with actual clients and things like that. And so that's why I went there. But I couldn't imagine how you replicate that online and like how you build those relationships with with your group mates or whatever online. So that's why I was curious about that. But you mentioned that the most important part about it though isn't the education, it's the extracurriculars. And you kind of dove right head first into that, right? Like you had Duck Ventures and Oregon Blockchain. I think those are both school groups that you started.
Correct. Yeah.
I think Duck Ventures came first, right? So what was that?
Yeah. So Duck Ventures, I don't know why, but from kind of an early age in college, actually, I think it was my freshman year, I was super interested in private equity and just how the flow of investments goes towards private companies and what that's used for, how it grow, how private companies grow in that sense, just really the kind of intricacies and nuances of private funding. And there was nothing that in a school setting, whether it was via a class or whatnot. I think there's actually a class now, but at U of O, but there wasn't at the time. And I was like, how can, and there was other students that expressed similar interest in the topic. And I was like, all right, well, let's like figure something out, right? Let's like dive in. The best way to learn is through experience, just diving in. So I kind of put this group together and contacted a few different kind of angel investors as well as VCs, and I think maybe even like one kind of larger private equity firm. And to be completely honest, totally cold email. I was like, hey, this is what I had in mind. I have this group of students with this desire and this ambition to learn about what you guys do and be involved in some way. Let us in on screenings. Let us take a look at why this company was a failure and bring a case study to you, and maybe you can like use that for some sort of value in the future or something. And that's exactly what we did. And there was about 3 or 4 entities and 1 or 2 angel investors that kind of fed us these. They were either legitimate deals that we would kind of do screenings on, or they were kind of these hypothetical deals that would was actually more value to us. So super thankful for those individuals because they totally took the time out of their day and was able to do that.
That must have been an awesome, just like networking tool for you, just to get in front of all these people. Like that's what I tell people with a podcast. Like it's probably similar, where it just gave people the reason to talk to you.
100%, 100%. I mean, even to this day, I'm still close with a bunch of those individuals. Opportunities have come my way that absolutely wouldn't have. Now, unfortunately, I think that the group isn't a thing anymore, but it was actually kind of taken over by the MBAs for a little bit. And then I don't think it's a thing anymore. But I think the reason why it's not a thing anymore is because there are actually classes now, which I can't confirm or deny whether that's because of Duck Ventures. But yeah, I'm just glad that there's actually classes taught by fantastic professors that have prior experience. Because I know there's a lot of students, even at U of O, that have interest in that space.
What are some of those things that really stick out to you? And I say what you learned through your time at Duck Ventures. Because I feel like private equity, for people who on the outside, they really don't understand how to get in. They don't understand it at all. It's like, what are some of those things that really stick with you today that you learned from your time at Duck Ventures?
That the likelihood of a startup succeeding is very, very low. But I would also say that you can get very creative with how you build something, how you build a company, how you build a startup. And you also need to really pay attention with who you surround yourself with. And I think it's so important to have individuals, on your team that just have very specific kind of interdisciplinary skill sets to one another. I think that increases the chances of success. But then I would also say, honestly, obviously the goal is a monetary outcome for investors as well as the entrepreneur. But I would also kind of say suggest success is somewhat subjective, because there's plenty of companies that have provided a ton of value and frankly it just didn't really work out from a financial perspective. But that's a whole other kind of tangent. Yeah, it's just a great place to learn all sides of how companies grow and why things are started and how things are funded and why that is, and on and on and on.
Can you kind of go down that tangent, like other ways you can deem success other than monetary? That's interesting.
I was trying to think of an example, but I mean, there's plenty of products that just didn't make financial success. And again, I'm trying to think of something right now, but provided a ton of value for people that just are bottoms up now that aren't a thing, or that honestly paved the way for future success. I mean, look at wow, I'm totally blanking on the kind of legacy social network that was prior to
Oh,
Facebook.
MySpace?
Was it MySpace? I was thinking of something else that was it was like a Facebook, but um, I feel like it was something else. It might have been MySpace, but I feel like it was something different. Anyways, and so you can kind of take like, hey, this is what this entrepreneur did, and um, I think people also misconstrue that you have to reinvent the wheel when there are plenty of things to put forth, and you're still bringing a ton of value if you just tweak a few things. But yeah, I think that's kind of the kind of my reasoning of like maybe this initial company wasn't a success, but down the road it was the catalyst of success for or the inspiration of success for other companies that did do well and provide a ton of value, or frankly change the world, such as Apple, Facebook, et cetera, whether it's good or bad.
On that note, I think to your point, like maybe they were the catalysts. Maybe they were also just early, right? Like I've listened to Mark Andreessen talk a few times, and he always says that sometimes really good ideas are just early. And it might not work, not because it sucks, but because it's early. And one of those examples is before the iPad, Apple released a tablet in like 1993. It didn't work because it was 1993 and the consumers just weren't ready. Like the tech wasn't fully there, but they put it out and it didn't go very well. They scrapped it for like 5 years. But then fast forward, the iPad didn't work. The timing was just off. And there's something else you said too that I want to talk about. Oh, you're talking about how people just iterate off of past failures or off of what's already out there, not having to reinvent the wheel. And I think as we move more towards into Web3, we're going to see that happening more and more. Because I was listening to, I think when Naval Ravikant talked the other day, and he was saying how like all the code and everything, it's going to be public because they're going to be able to see it. So it's going to be easier for people to innovate on top of each other's creations, which is going to lead to more innovation faster. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
One other thing you said that I wanted to ask you about is that you learned that how hard it is for startups to become successful and to not fail. So with that in mind, why do you keep starting startups?
It's fun. There's a lot to learn, and failures of sorts. I know people maybe don't like the term failure, but you learn so much about you. You learn so much about whatever you were working on, and maybe why it didn't succeed in retrospect. But yeah, I think just taking a stab. I feel like everybody when they're young should at least take a stab at trying to create something. And that could be a side hustle turning into a main hustle. That could be a new technology. That could be a media company. Heck, I mean, whatever it is, whatever you're passionate about, whatever you have a skill in, give it a shot. Why not?
So before we dive into your media company, I want to talk about, I don't know if they're necessarily failures, but things you started that you're no longer working on. Because there's other ways you can get value out of something, like you said, that not just monetary. But I think one was Shred and the other one was Fleet Nurse. I believe those are two things you'd started prior to Dapper Life, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll touch on Fleet Nurse first, because that's actually they're doing great. That was actually started by one of the mentors. Actually, we're just talking about Duck Ventures. One of the initial guys I met through Duck Ventures, who was an angel investor, basically said, "Hey, I've got this idea." I had no idea that staffing in the medical space, in the medical industry, was such an issue. And he came directly from the medical space and said, "Hey, I've got this idea for an app. Here's what it is, X, Y, Z. Here's how we get started." I was like, "Heck, I'm like 19 or 20. Like, I just have an ambition and drive and to learn and to be involved in something cool, and let's do it." So just kind of really started from the ground level, and yeah, still a co-founder to this day. I think it's about a $30 or $40 million company. They've got over, I think, 15,000 nurses on the platform, a ton of acute care facilities, and it's quite literally kind of like a TaskRabbit for facilities and nurses and other kind of medical professionals. So it just connects both sides.
So as a co-founder of that business, what were the other co-founders like? Like, I don't know if you're technical or not. So is there technical co-founders? Like, I think the problem that a lot of people, I have this idea, but I'm not technical. So like, how did you go about the technical side when putting together Fleet Nurse?
That was not my forte, to be honest with you. I just kind of wore a ton of hats, helped just kind of grow any way we could, help with marketing, help with a little bit of design and such. But yeah, so Israel, the founder and CEO, I think he actually contracted a third party to develop the app. I believe it's now all in-house, but that's kind of what he did initially, was outsourced to a development company, and just kind of went from there.
And so you're still co-founder. So what's your involvement today? Are you just kind of advising and things like that, or or is that more a bigger part of your day?
Oh no, yeah, not super involved, but I'm kind of like a board observer, I guess. I can listen on the board discussions, which is super cool. And again, talk about really great early experience. I mean, I was 21 or 20 when I was on my first like board call with all these, individuals that are twice my age, and just hearing the discussions and asking questions helped so much. And then I still get invited to the holiday parties, and that's about it.
That's key. That's important.
Yeah.
So the other idea was Shred, which is interesting because that one, you went through a pivot with that company. Because from my understanding, it used to be kind of like all the e-scooters that are popping up everywhere. You can rent scooters. It was kind of going to be the same thing, but with with boosted boards essentially, right? With remote control longboards. And then it switched to like a TripAdvisor, but more so for kind of those action oriented experiences, right?
That's exactly correct. Yeah. So this was kind of peak, scooter and last mile mobility was when we really started that. And, as you probably recall, there was at one point, three or four scooter companies, Bird, Lime, and I think, what's the other one? Skip is a good one, that were all had, multi-billion dollar valuations. I mean, it's just absolutely absurd. And there was more talk about private equity and private funding. There was more funding flowing into those companies than I think anybody's ever seen. It was just absolutely nuts. And, obviously we kind of saw that hype and saw an opportunity to be a little bit more niche and focus specifically on college campuses. It was a constrained environment that you could sort of quote unquote own in a sense, because a huge issue was compliance, within these sort of city zones. Huge issue. But with a college campus, it's a pretty defined area. And so we could set up charging stations, which again help with compliance. We could have training sessions. It was just a different vehicle. Some people love scooters, some people love bikes, some people love boards. And so we did a ton of like kind of market research. We actually had 6 LOIs, most notably one from, where was it? USC at one point, to kind of at some point do a mock small trial of sense. And I mean, it could be like 5 to 10 boards, and it could be in a small section, but nonetheless, kind of try it out in a campus setting. Long story short, hardware is really hard and takes a lot of funding. And being at the time, it was literally, myself and one of my, now partners, colleagues, and friends, Connor Bussey. We were 20 somethings, pretty much no experience. Neither of us are engineers. And we built the first couple of boards even, and they were fully functional. It worked, and eventually brought on other advisors, but it just got super saturated. People were concerned about safety, totally valid. We had some solutions for that, but yeah, I think the farthest we got was we had a bunch of prototypes, we had some LOIs, and it was just hard to raise money to actually produce the boards in kind of full production, full capacity, so that we could fulfill some of these tests.
So for companies, because I saw you published probably around the time you were starting this, you did a series on Medium about the e-scooter industry. So I'm sure you're pretty well versed in that. So with these e-scooter companies, with the hardware, was it just an excessive amount of venture money coming in, and that's how we're able to produce them all? Or how did it work for those companies? Like, how did they succeed with with such high overhead and hardware?
100%. Yeah. It was the amount of venture money I don't think I've ever seen flowing into one space, into one sector in such a small amount of time ever. I mean, I'm sure there's something, but I'm fairly young. So this is kind of like my first, experience into like, holy crap, this is an absolutely obtrusive amount of money. And there is absolutely, I mean, it's, there was no plan, in my opinion. There was no plan for like actual profit. It was like, let's just grow, until we can, yeah, see what happens kind of. Actually, funny enough, I think recently Bird just went public via SPAC, but that's kind of a whole other tangent that we could go down.
And so when did you guys decide to pull the plug on the boards and switch to an app? Like, when did you decide that? And what does pivoting a company look like? Because, hear people talk about it all the time. Oh, we pivoted, we changed this. But internally, like, what does that look like for the company?
So there was about a 2 or 3 week period where we were just so down in the dumps. And that's just kind of the thing about entrepreneurship, is you're going to have a lot of those moments, and you really just got to pick yourself back up and be like, hey, how can I turn this into something interesting and still bring value to, to society, frankly. And so what was interesting is that it actually wasn't super far off from our initial concept. What we wanted to do is, on the app, be able to like kind of gather this data of where people were most, going in high volume. So they could be riding their board to the coffee shop. Great. Well, then now we can have some sort of deal with the coffee shop, kind of et cetera, et cetera. And it was, it was the same thing as like, oh, are they going to do this like fun event with friends or something like that? So we always kind of wanted to be the destination for last mile, but also the destination for connecting last mile to things you want to do and things you want to enjoy. And so we kind of expanded on that. And then we looked into some of the key competitors. As you mentioned, TripAdvisor was one of them. And, no hate to TripAdvisor whatsoever, but just from a younger person's perspective, it seems extremely antiquated. And I don't know a single person that books adventures and experiences through TripAdvisor or any other like app as of most recent, Expedia or whatever. It's just not a very good user experience. And so um, we wanted to change that. I mean, I think our generation of kind of millennial to Gen Z ish is most adapt to wanting to experience life and willing to spend money on experiences, frankly, even if it puts them like in debt, you know? Um, that wasn't our goal by any means, but we wanted to help people enjoy life and find experiences in a much more concrete and simplistic way. Well, not taking away from the day to day life of just living life. We wanted it to be kind of like DoorDash, how you order food in like 3 clicks. Same thing. You find an experience that you're interested in your own personal area or wherever you're traveling, and in 2 to 3 clicks, you could be on the water with a surfboard, basically.
It was you and a friend that started this company, you said?
Yeah, so it was kind of my business partner, colleague, friend, who's helped start Oregon Blockchain at UVO, and his name's Connor Bussey, fantastic guy. And I talked about kind of interdisciplinary skill sets. I'm more of the kind of creative, high level vision. He's very data analytical, financial, operations, etc. But we also had a few notable advisors that really, really helped us day to day. That definitely can't go ignored either, which I'm happy to dive into.
Is one of those advisors Brian Johnston, who ultimately became CEO?
Correct. Yeah, Brian would kind of take the reins in a sense. He has a past background in. He was the former CMO of the UFC. Was at GoPro for a while and worked at Nike as well for a while too.
Yeah. So how did you guys get in contact with him? Because like just looking at his track record, like that's probably the optimal person to be CEO of a company like this. So how do you attract, especially as students at the time, how do you attract talent like that to the company?
Yeah, so it kind of goes back to just connections early. I had known his daughter in high school, and my friend, I don't know if this is TMI, but my friend actually dated his daughter for a while in high school. And so we just had this back in high school, we just had this early connection of, I obviously had interest in business and entrepreneurship, and he was this, you know, super cool, outdoorsy kind of business entrepreneurial guy and somebody who I looked up to. And so uh, I quite literally, I think I called him or texted him, and it was actually the shred board idea that first, and he was kind of advising in that sense, and then became really, really hands-on and pivotal and helping things progress there. Um, so yeah, we just got closer and closer. Excuse me, and to this day, I mean, we're super close, and very thankful for everything that Brian has taught and done for us. So.
And you guys all because when you were building this again, pandemic was happening, so travel wasn't happening a ton either, right? So you guys, I don't exactly know, but you did some initiative, like as a result of the pandemic, to help small local travel businesses, right?
Yeah, man, this was gritty. So I mean, we went state by state, and I quite literally called up any sort of like adventure operator, as we called them, or experience operator, from mostly West Coast, but sort of Midwest too. And what we did was we would kind of bridge the gap here of connecting like sort of media companies and that could get the word out there and be like, hey, similar to struggling restaurants, there are these struggling kind of mostly, frankly, mom and pop experience operators, which make our lives enjoyable and have a lot of fun and that really need kind of your support. And so what we would do is we would put them on the site, have some sort of shout out with kind of a larger company. A great example was TechCrunch, kind of did a little blurb on us one time, which was super cool. And yeah, people would purchase experiences for future use, almost like kind of like a gift card, if you will. We didn't get there was no fee, there was no commission. We just really wanted to establish these relationships, honestly, between both sides, because we saw the value of those relationships in the future. And again, it kind of goes back to like why I enjoy entrepreneurship too, is because you're bringing value, you're helping people out, and that makes me feel really good.
And with Shred or Fleet Nurse, did you do any fundraising with that? Like, did your experience with Duck Ventures and the connections you made come into play with raising capital for those businesses?
Yeah, Fleet Nurse raised a ton of money. That was more led by more led by Israel, the co-founder and CEO. He did give me the opportunity to kind of sit in on certain things and hear certain discussions and just kind of chat about the raise goal, etc. But then yeah, I mean, Shred was way more like myself and was really our being Connor and I's first experience into trying to raise money. And we did plenty of pitches, both in person and digitally. And I mean, that was an invaluable experience in itself. You learn a lot about yourself for sure.
So what are some of those things you learned about yourself?
That raising money is really hard, and you hear a lot of what the hell are you doing? This is stupid. And that's said a little bit of an exaggeration, but um, just kind of this doesn't make sense, but said nicely. Uh, and just a lot of doubt. And you just have to keep wading through that doubt. And ultimately, it didn't really work out as I just talked about, but still, I think that that's stuck with me in terms of that. Just kind of having thick skin and really sticking with your beliefs and what you believe can be something interesting, even if 95% of the people you talk to are kind of against it or doubt it.
So how do you determine in a situation like that then what advice to take in from these investors and when to kind of dig your heels in and stick to your convictions?
There's a ton of, in my opinion, perspective bias in private funding that you definitely have to weigh out, kind of just let it go over you in a sense. But it is challenging because some people, many investors speak with uh, high regard and lots of conviction. But I think it really boils down to kind of their experience and also their understanding, which is a little bit on us. And like I mentioned, this is our first time raising money. So maybe our pitches could have been better. And we did try to always ask for feedback and always try to make it better and better and more clear. But yeah, you definitely kind of go to bed at night sometimes thinking, man, is this really a good idea? Should we be pursuing this or should we be pursuing something else?
And ultimately now you are pursuing something else, right? So when did you make the decision to close down Shred? Was that just things with the TikTok side were going so well that you wanted to focus all your efforts, or what led to that decision?
Yeah, so there was kind of this conflation in time, and where a multitude of things happened all at once. Where it was my senior year, I was graduating, we were in quarantine, we were doing classes remotely, but also things were like kind of on pause at school. It was very interesting. Things were trying to be figured out because it's very early on in the pandemic. And yeah, in that time, I just had a bunch of time. We were growing Shred, working daily, but at the same time, just at night, I was like, oh, this is kind of like a fun, weird, emerging platform that I wanted to test out. And my roommates and I would make these like funny videos and do a bunch of different skits and dances and anything that was ridiculous, on TikTok. And basically we did something on sports and it stuck. And just kind of the rationale was like, which I think people honestly miss out on TikTok because, and I'm going on a little bit of tangent, so you can feel free to cut me off wherever. But um, if you're consistently posting and focused on a niche, you will have a video that goes viral. There's no doubt in my mind. In all the accounts I've either worked on, started, or helped start, that's always the case. And with that initial video that goes viral, you're going to have an influx of followers that expect exactly what that initial video niche is. And you have to keep compounding on top of that. So my rationale was like, all right, I started with sports. Great. This is a sports account. That's it. That's final. And thankfully, I really like sports. So I continued on with that. And yeah, it's kind of history after that.